Critics invariably portray, as you just heard now, waterboarding and other stress techniques as torture. I would stipulate easily and readily that waterboarding and other stress techniques is a fairly unpleasant practice. It offends our 21st century sensibilities. It's something that's difficult to talk about. But I also believe that we're at war with an implacable and ruthless foe that thinks nothing about killing civilians by the thousands and seeking to kill millions more. I don't think anybody would disagree that obtaining intelligence is vital in this war. And we can debate theoretically the proposition that other techniques work, but it's a matter of fact. There are instances where hardened enemy operatives did not prove susceptible to these kinder, gentler techniques, and yet provided intelligence, then they were subjected to stressful interrogation techniques. But my overarching message to you is that this is a policy debate. It should be a policy debate, which is why asking the question that has been posed today is useful. The obsession of legalities is not helpful. The legal definition of torture is necessarily vague. The torture defined in the 94 statute, which was passed to implement obligations under the Anti-Torture Convention, as, quote, intentional infliction of severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental. Whilst the legal debate about torture boils down to the question of how severe is severe. As far as the physical pain and suffering is concerned, it's almost certainly the case that some forms of waterboarding that have been practiced by the CIA on only 3 occasions that we know of for 3 different high-value detainees rise to the level of torture. And some, probably, particularly those that do not involve full inundation of the subject, do not. The reason for this is because the physical discomfort suffered by the subject of being subjected to this technique, while real, is not severe enough. As far as the mental severe pain and suffering is concerned, it bears emphasizing that Congress deliberately adopted a narrow definition of the term severe to encompass only, and I quote, prolonged mental harm caused by or resulting from the threat of imminent death or mind-altering substances. In my view, the waterboarding and other techniques practiced by the CIA do not fit this definition for at least 2 reasons. First of all, the practice of waterboarding used by the CIA was extremely short, 60 to 90 seconds, which certainly suggests, even to our lawyer, but it's not protracted. Significantly, the question of what constitutes protracted was further debated by Congress in 2005 and 2006 in the context of 2 key pieces of legislation that Congress handled. And once again, the answer was that there has to be some duration, some timeline for somebody to be considered protracted. Second, the high-value terrorists being interrogated were perfectly aware that they're not in any danger of death, that the CIA was after information, their lives were not in danger. Then Congress passed, in Detainee Treatment Act, something called shocks the conscience standard, which makes it even harder to argue that these techniques are always inherently and absolutely torture. Because the shocks the conscience standard, by definition, and it's something that borrows from the American case law, it is inherently a context-specific standard. It is not something that you would be able to answer in the abstract. It's also worthy to point out that while the original Justice Department so-called torture memo was perhaps overly broad in its definition of what level of pain and suffering constitutes torture, the Office of Legal Counsel came up with some more nuanced analysis. Significantly, ladies and gentlemen, this analysis was developed by lawyers, at least some of whom were critical of the administration's policy. Indeed, as reported in the media, including by Stuart Taylor of the National Journal, the lead author of the subsequent memo by OLC on this issue was none other than senior DOJ official Dan Levin, who himself had been subjected to waterboarding as a part of his research. I know that trusting the government is not an argument most of you like these days, but I would certainly be inclined to trust Dan Levin, who, by the way, was reportedly forced out by Alberto Gonzalez for not being sufficiently solicitous of the White House positions on various other issues. Now, presented with this argument, the critics claim, well, maybe it's not torture, but maybe it's cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, which is another set of legal buzzwords. Yet cruel, inhuman, and degrading are even more capacious terms than torture. For some detainees, the mere fact that they're being questioned by a Jew or a woman is an intolerable humiliation. Are we supposed to countenance and approve this kind of racist sentiment? Meanwhile, it's also the case that there have to be some reasonable definition of what is cruel, inhuman, and degrading, because I would submit to you that there is a degree of humiliation, cruelty, and degradation in any kind of custodial interrogation. There's yelling, there's screaming, Threats are being made against the person or his loved ones. Andy Faustow of Enron fame was told by his interrogators that his wife would be in prison for a long time, and I would submit to you that it was probably a cruel treatment. So there has to be some parameters of behavior that clearly is cruel and degrading and humiliating, but yet does not violate the law. My bottom line is this. While the waterboarding debate implicates legal issue, we cannot simply abandon the field to the lawyers. The lawyers have no special right or expertise to deal with those issues. It's our duty as a society to approach this debate seriously in a mature fashion, to ask what is really consistent with our values. Incidentally, we talked about mistakes. My good friend John mentioned mistakes. And yes, shoving somebody's head in a sleeping bag is not a good thing. But as you may recall, these problems occur in other contexts. When I was at the Justice Department, one of my responsibilities was investigating various bad things that happen in the Bureau of Prisons. And let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, in a situation there is no blessing for stress techniques. Instead, in fact, prisoners in federal and civil and state penitentiaries not being interrogated at all. You have fellow prisoners who commit horrible things. You have sadistic guards who do horrible things. Recently, had a case in Florida involving mistreatment by the guards of a child in a boot camp, where he was basically smothered and suffocated in the course of trying to set him straight. This is not an easy debate. We should not focus exclusively on the question of how to deal with enemy combatants. We should ask the broader set of questions of what level of coercion are we prepared to tolerate in our public policy, something that our government is doing. We should not come up with one set of regimen for captured and lawful enemy combatants when we waterboard our own personnel. Then there are things going on in other spheres of public life, including, as I mentioned, in boot camps that are harsher. But the last point is, whatever we do, we should be honest and transparent about this debate. We should not use misdirection. We should not talk in terms of, well, let's adopt the same standards as an Army Field Manual, because, ladies and gentlemen, the Army Field Manual, by the way, allows the level of Mutt and Jeff technique that does not allow the interrogator playing the bad cop to be disrespectful, to be tough on an individual. So here we have politicians advocating the level of kindness towards the unlawful enemy combatants that exceeds that's being adopted with regard to interrogation of criminal suspects. That is not the good way to deal with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.